Hi, this is Gayatri. Welcome to my course on Patanjali Yogasutras. I'd like to begin with a prayer. Vande Gurunam Charanarabinde Sandarshita Swatma Sukhavabodhe Nishreyase Jangalikayamane Sansara Halahala Mohashanti Abahu Purushakaram Shankha Sidharinam Sahasra Shirasam Shvetam Pranamamim Patanjalim. Om. Welcome to Lesson 1. Samadhi Pada, Sutra 1. Atha, Yoga-ANUŠÀSANAM. Let us understand how each of the Maharishis, the Gurus, and their bhashyas translate this first sutra. According to Maharishi VYASA, yoga here stands for samadhi or communion, or the control over the functions of the mind. The nature of such communion is the nature of the mind. The states of the mind that he defines for us are ksipita, fickle, which resides in rajas; mudha, dullness, which resides in tamas; viksipita, distracted, which occurs in sattva; ekagra, one-pointed, in which all states of mind mentioned previously have ceased; and nirudha, inhibited. Communion or yoga, according to Maharishi VYASA, is that which happens only in the one-pointed state that illuminates the true nature of things, destroys afflictions, loosens karmic bonds, and brings you face to face with nirudha or the inhibited nature, which is samprajnata yoga or concrete communion. Asamprajnata yoga or the abstract communion is that in which all states of mind are surpassed. Such yoga is known by its characteristics of perception, conception, joy, self-awareness. Samskara is the residue and is left behind. The same sutra is explained by Swami Satyananda more etymologically. Atha, he says, is the pause. It means now therefore. But why has Patanjali used now therefore? Why did he not use atra or here are the instructions? That is indicative, Swami Satyananda says, that these instructions are a continuation of a previous instruction. And therefore such yoga comes after purification through karma yoga and bhakti yoga, the paths of action and devotion. When you arrive at yoga after these paths, the yoga you attain or the practice of yoga is intelligible and fruitful. When your mind and body is not purified through karma yoga, bhakti yoga, and you arrive at yoga, then your mind is wavering. And wavering minds and tendencies cannot unlock yoga. Anu, he points out, is the suffix to shasanam, which is a command. The word shastra and ishvara both derive from shasan and mean instruction and he who gives instruction. So, Swami Satyananda disagrees with the other commentators who have translated Atha, anusasanam as now the exposition of yoga, because he points out that Patanjali's Yoga Sutra is very, very concise. He doesn't even use adjectives or adverbs. There's not a single unnecessary word in the sutra, and therefore it cannot be an exposition. It is brief, concise, instructive. What he's saying is, this is how you practice yoga. These are the conditions of the mind. This is how the individual experiments. This is the place of God in yoga. It is this. And that in itself is the complete instruction. Swami Vivekananda does not go into detail explaining the first sutra. He just translates it as now concentration is explained. He treats it as a simple introductory line and directly gets into the second sutra. In the introduction to the sutras, however, he points out that the now indicates the moment of time in the present, in which we see that we are the outcome and manifestation of an absolute condition prior to our present relative condition and are going forward to return again to the absolute. Now, I know Swami Vivekananda can sometimes sound a little, verbose, but what he's basically saying is you're standing in the now. And that now is what links us to the past, where we have come from, and links us to the future, where we are going. And both where we have come from and where we are going is towards the absolute. And this is what he sets about explaining in his introduction. So we are both the outcome and manifestation of the past, of the prior condition. And we are going forward to return to the same state. So in a sense, he's saying there's neither past nor present, and yet there is both past and present. Take some time to dwell on that. The next one is B.K. Iyengar. And he translates it as now, with prayers for divine blessings. The procedural guidance in the codes of conduct instructions, which are to be observed and which form the base from which to cultivate one's spiritual and ethical life. Okay, I'll just clarify that a little. Now, Atha, with prayers for divine blessings. Procedural guidance in the codes of conduct, these instructions which are to be observed and which form the base from which to cultivate one's spiritual and ethical life, will begin. So, what B.K. Iyengar is saying is, he observes that these are detailed instructions and codes. These come step by step. They come in a specific order. They come in the correct order. And it moves us towards an end which is self-enlightenment for the purpose of liberation. B.K. Iyengar notes that Patanjali is the first to give us the new path. And his use of the word now, Atha, is an expression of immediacy. Now take it up. Start now. Now it is clarified. It is also a continuation from his previous treatises on grammar and Ayurveda. As we saw in the introduction, I've already mentioned this, that along with Patanjali's treatises on grammar and Ayurveda, the Yogasutras become the Moksha Sutras. And Sri Iyengar points out that as grammar is a prerequisite for lucid speech and Ayurveda of health of body, together these work to support our journey to establish equilibrium, the cultivation and transcendence of consciousness, culminating in liberation from rebirth, which is the ultimate end. He also points out that Atha is the beginning of the Brahma Shastra, and hence it is a proclamation. It's a desire to know Brahman. And in the Yoga Sutras, it is a similar proclamation, Atha, now. It is the urgency by which you declare that you're ready to see yourself. And in the Yoga Sutra, it is the seer who is the object of knowledge. Therefore, he points out, yoga is a subjective art, philosophy, science. It has many meanings, but it is in the Yoga Sutra that it is the state of samadhi or the indivisible state of existence. So to sort of summarize what he's saying, he explains the disciplines of integration, the disciplines by which we are integrated, are here expounded through experience and are given to humanity for the exploration and recognition of that hidden part of man which is beyond the awareness of the senses. Now, Osho explains it a bit more simply. So I quite like Osho's explanation. I also like Swami Satyananda's because I think he's very, very systematic and clear about what he's trying to say. The others also have clarity, but I think they assume a higher level of knowledge in the student, which unfortunately we do not have. So we struggle a bit with their words. They use especially Swami Vivekananda uses very large words, very circuitous reasoning. B.K. Iyengar is completely at an elevated level of conversation. So you take a minute to sort of catch up with what he's saying because we haven't. Our minds are not racing at the speed at which his is. Osho, I think, simplifies things for people like me. And he says, now the discipline of yoga. So he translates the line very literally. But Osho, being Osho, then jumps to comparing it with Kierkegaard's existential anguish. And he says, now, why does he say now the discipline of yoga? Because if your mind has reached a state of existential anguish, then you are ready for yoga. And if that moment has not come for you, you can keep studying yoga, but you will not be a yogi. This is really interesting because what Osho basically says is that if you're not in pain already, if you're not suffering already, you won't get yoga. Because intellectual interest in the sutras is not the path to being a yogi. You cannot take an academic interest in yoga. If you have come to that point where your mind is in darkness, confusion, where no path is clear, and your seeking of that path is the driver, then your time has come. And that is what is meant, according to Osho, by Atha. It is now. Now your time has come. If your mind has come to realize that whatsoever you have been doing up to now is just senseless, he says. It was a nightmare at its worst and a dream at its best, then the path of discipline opens up before you. Up until now, you have lived as a chaos, as crowd. Yoga means now you will have harmony. You will have to become one. You will undergo a coming together, a crystallization, a centering. And unless you reach this point, everything you do is useless, fragmented, a waste of time and life. Hence, he says, Patanjali says, now the discipline of yoga. Now, after all this mucking about and wandering and searching and being lost, now you have arrived at the discipline of yoga. If your life is misery, now your moment has come. And this moment, when it comes, can change your direction of being. And he says, only someone with a center can be blissful. But you have to work for it. You have to earn it. A crowd cannot be blissful because there's no doer, there's no seer. So who's going to be blissful? You see? You have to, basically what he's saying is you have to identify the locus. Then the bliss will follow. This act of centering yourself is what becomes the discipline. And that, Osho says, is what Patanjali calls anusasanam. And it is essentially the capacity to learn, the capacity to know, but also the capacity to be. And yoga is not about asana. It is not about sitting. That's just one of the 8 limbs. It's about the capacity to be. And he tells this really beautiful story over here about a man who's like an activist and who goes to Buddha and says, you know what, I agree with you, the world is in misery. All beings are miserable. The world is miserable. And Osho clarifies that the Buddha actually didn't say that the world is in misery. He said that you are in misery because of lack of clarity, because of not knowing the mind, because of ignorance. So the Buddha doesn't actually say the world is misery, but this man goes to him and says, the whole world is misery. How do we save people? Come on, tell me. And the Buddha just looks at him and he says nothing. And then Ananda, his disciple, sort of nudges him and says, look, this man has shown up and he's willing to do things in service of humanity. Why are you not guiding him? Guide him. And the Buddha looks at him and he says, but when I see you, I don't see a center in you. I don't see that you have seen yourself. And if somebody like you goes and starts doing work in the world, it ends up creating more mischief. It won't help. And here's the thing that, we keep talking about compassion, service, activism, doing things. Just blindly doing things are not going to help the world. It's not going to help anybody be put out of their misery. But the same actions that come, and here's where, though each of these gurus, as you can see, are vastly different, they're also very similar, because this kind of echoes what Swami Satyananda says when he says that there is a before, right? And B.K. Iyengar also says that this is in consonance with the other aspects of the Moksha Sutras. But Swami Satyananda says you have to arrive at yoga through karma yoga and bhakti yoga. Those have to be included. That's also what Osho says, that the same actions done through a centered being, a person who sees his center, has impact. So in yoga, the student is very important, but the master is also very important. You see, a disciple is not just somebody who has discipline, but also somebody who's ready to receive. And in the act of receiving, you become fearless. And when you become fearless, and those of you who've studied yoga with the real master, for instance, when you're doing the drop backs or certain asanas that won't unlock themselves to you, because typically it's because you're afraid. You're afraid of falling. You're afraid of your face hitting the floor. You're afraid of getting hurt. You're afraid you'll hurt your back. And so we restrain ourselves. So when a disciple is ready to receive, and when he's centered, he becomes fearless. And it is through this fearlessness that you unlock further learning. And Osho says a very interesting line. He says, a disciple is a seeker who is not a crowd. Okay. Coming to Barbara Stoller Miller, she doesn't really translate the first sutra in isolation. She explains the first 4 aphorisms together, and she translates it very simply as, this is the teaching of yoga. Simple introductory line. But she uses the first 4 aphorisms to define the nature of yoga as a state of mental tranquility and spiritual freedom, as well as means to achieve this state. And so she's not really going into the nowness of yoga. It's a little bit of hair splitting. I agree with the first sutra. Now, so you clearly have a difference between analysts who don't think that matters that much and gurus who think that it does. So that is the first sutra, and we'll come back to that. We'll also reference it in the context of the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th when we go ahead. Thank you for listening, and I hope you'll come back to listen to the 2nd sutra.